So you have the absolute basics of Giants Editor down. Now you want to do more. If you're eager to get your hands on some real game assets, stay tuned. At the end of the video, you will know essential settings to work with game assets, how to load assets from the game, what the different icons in the scene graph are all about, and how Giants generally structures their game assets. Hi there, I'm Nadine and I hope you are ready for the next episode in our Giants Editor Basics series. Let's jump right in. Here we are at my computer now. I already opened the Giants Editor. In order to be able to load any game assets, we first need to make one essential setting. So we go to File, Preferences, and then we need to set the game installation path. So click on the three dots and choose the folder where you installed Farming Simulator. So for me that's Steam Library, Common, and then Farming Simulator 25. You don't have to go anywhere below that, just choose the Farming Simulator 25 folder. And then we apply that setting and we close the settings. And now we can go to File, a new mod from Game, to load the game assets. This might take a few seconds. If you get an error message about the missing game installation here, you need to go back to the previous step because then you have an error in your game folder. In this menu you can basically see all the game assets. You can choose between store items and map items, and you can filter all the different types of assets, and you can also search. Let's choose a car, the Series 200 over here, and click OK. Then the tool will ask you for a working directory. By default it will use your Documents folder and it will create a My FS25 mods subfolder there with the name of the asset. I just leave that for now. Then it loads up the game asset. Might take a few seconds. It probably looks like this for you. All these yellow and blue lines over here are lights. To have the view a bit less cluttered, we can do a right click and then under Show, disable the lights. You probably also see the cameras here in the cabin. You can also disable these in the same menu. So Show, Cameras, and disable that. Also, you might want to disable the lights of being selected and also the cameras, because what can happen if when you now, for example, try to select the license plate, it will just select one of the lights because that's not visible but it's still there. So if we right click again and under selectable also disable the lights and cameras over here, you can now select what you want. So let's now have a look through the scene graph. If I open everything what we have in this object, you can see that we have a very long list over here. And that's because of each sub-object has an entry here. You might ask, why do we need so many objects? And that's because the visuals of the object and the collisions and the different types of settings are all separate. Every movable part is separate. Every light is separate. And also you have different types of hooks where the game will attach other things. For example, the first subfolder we see here is wheels. The car doesn't have any wheels because, as you know probably, in the game you often can choose between different types of wheels, and that's why it's not loaded directly with the asset, but it's loaded in-game. But still, within the asset we need a hook to where attach the wheel to, and this is all these items which we see over here. So here are different transform groups. This is probably the one which the game will use to attach the wheel when it's loaded. Generally, if you're working with the game assets and you don't understand why we have so many sub-items or what a sub-item is for, and you have the impression that it's basically only empty and doesn't do anything, just leave it there, because I made this mistake when I started. I thought, yeah, why do they have all these subfolders which are not doing anything? Can't we just access or put the asset there directly? And I removed them, only to understand later that, yeah, it was used for collisions or whatever. So if that doesn't make sense to you at the moment, just leave it as it is, and then probably at a later stage you will understand. When you select an item here in the scene graph, it will select the item and also everything below it. So if I now select the top item, series 200 main component, basically I have selected everything. You can see here that I also selected a big cube, and that is not the model itself, but it's something different. Let me just close that everything down. Let's go to attachable gooseneck. That's the item here where you can attach a trailer. And if we open that subgroup, you can still see a few different transform groups in here. We can now have a closer look at the asset itself. This is the 3D model behind it, but it also still has a subgroup, as you can see. So we have the gooseneck hitch and the gooseneck decal. If we click on the decals, we see that it's just the bolts over here. Generally, the Giants editor will display this yellow outline for the selected assets. But if you want to have a closer look how the 3D object is composed and what different surfaces it has, you can go to the preferences and then under viewport, activate the wireframe selection and apply. This will give you a much more detailed view of the 3D asset, and you can see the triangles, what the shape is made of. But also if you select a big asset, having this activated, basically you can't see anything anymore. So generally you might not want to have that activated only when you're really zooming in into something. The decals, which we see over here, are two-dimensional objects. Decals, if you see that in the scene graph, it normally means that the object is two-dimensional. If I just rotate that, for example, you can see that it's not the bolts itself, but the plate underneath, which is the decal. And that's only two-dimensional. You can see that in that wireframe view that it's only two triangles. You can also see the gooseneck hitch over here has that red arrow in the scene graph. That red arrow means that the object is not loaded within this file directly, but it's just a reference to an external file. That helps to keep the file size manageable, and of course it also helps with reusing assets. If it's a reference object, you can see that here in the ID reference in the attribute section, and here it shows the file name of the item which is loaded. If you make any changes to this object, for example, what I just did was rotating the decals, that doesn't have any effect on the object itself. It will just be loaded again when you open up the file next time. I can also say over here, reload reference file, and it will just be back to normal. You can also choose to unlink the reference file if you open it up. If you choose unlink, that will mean that the reference will be changed to a real import. And then if you make any changes, it will be saved. This is basically everything I want to cover about the car at the moment. Let's now have a look at a map. We go again to File and New Mod from Game. We don't want to save that right now. And then we choose the map items over here. And you can see that you have all the maps from the base game. Let's use the mod map US and click OK. We get the same question about the working directory. I leave it as it is. And now it takes a while. Might take a few minutes based on your computer. While we wait, while it's perfectly possible to open the game assets directly, if you go to the program directory, it's not advisable to do that, because if you open them and then you make some changes and accidentally save them, it will change your game asset. It happened to me, and then I had to reinstall the game, and yeah, that's just not fun. So you shouldn't open the assets from the game directly. Always use this new mod from game, or if you already have an i3D file, you can choose to import them. That will also create a copy. If you're enjoying this video, don't forget to give it a like. If you subscribe to my channel, it will help you not to miss any of the future episodes in the tutorial series. Also, if you have any questions or feedback or requests for future videos, please leave it down in the comments. Thank you. This is how it looks when the loading of the map has finished. Get an overall view of the complete map. The scene graph looks rather short, but it is, if you expand it, expand all, you can see that we have a very long list of assets in the map. So that's really a lot. Let's collapse it back again. And let's first talk about the different entries in the scene graph. We first have the light, which is the sun over here. Then we have a camera. This is this camera icon. We have the terrain. That's, as you can see, the whole terrain of the inner map, not the outer one. This is only a deco object, but this is the terrain where you can walk on. And then these icons over here are transform groups. You can think of a transform group basically as an empty object with a location and attributes. It is often used as a folder for grouping items together, but it also can have its own attributes. As you can see over here, the career start point. It has a location, of course, but if you look under user attribute, it has a special function which steers basically that this is the point where you start when you first load the game. Remember the shortcut F to jump to items. So we can now use that to jump around on the map. So for example, if we want to check out that career start point, we select it in the scene graph and press F. It can take a second for you to load because the editor needs to load all the graphics. So this is where you start out. Let's now open the gameplay transform group and river. And here you can see this line icon. This is a spline. I press F again so that we can have a look at it. Oh, that is a bit too far away, so let me just select another one and press F to be closer. And now if I zoom out and select the spline again, we can see that this is a line object. And you can use this for game assets to move on this line. So here in this case, it's of course used for the ships on the river, but it's also the same type of object for the AI traffic. They also move along this kind of spline. Let me select again that fishing net. You can also use that to explain something. If you open the scene graph and have a look at this one, you can see that it also has some sub-transform groups under it. The blue cube here basically means that this is a 3D asset, but it also has several ones. You can see here that the net and the details are separate. You can also see this lock icon here in the fishing net. That means that this item generally is locked. You can see it also in the transform attributes. It's a locked group. The advantage of locking an item like this is when the asset is not locked, and it has kind of sub-items like we see here. It can happen that when you select it with the mouse, you only select a sub-item of it. But if you want to make sure that you always select the complete object with all the subgroups, you go to the highest group and use that lock icon, because if it's not opened like this and you click on it, it will always only select the top item, and when you then move it around, you are sure that you always have the complete object with you. Generally here on the map we can see that there is a distinction between gameplay and map. Under gameplay you would find the objects where you can interact with. For example, the vehicle shop. You can use the F to jump there and have a look at that. And under map you would generally find all the deco objects. I think I should get rid of that wireframe selection, that annoys me a bit. Go to viewport, wireframe selection, apply. So now we have just the yellow outline. It's also a bit faster. And under map we see the subfolders location, background, rocks. So this is basically all the deco objects which don't have a function in themselves. They are only visual. But this distinction is not 100%. You may find deco objects under gameplay and also objects to interact with under map, but that's kind of how Giants does it. Now we can also try out the first person mode, because now we have a map. So let's click on the eye in the toolbar, and it will then drop you to the ground. And now you can use the mouse movements to look around and walk via a SDW. If you want to stop this mode, you can press escape. So now let's explore the map a bit. We open map and then locations, buildings, buying stations area, and then gas station 1 cluster. We select it in the Scenegraph and then press F. It will take us to the gas station. Generally, the editor will always try to give it the full picture. So you might end up behind some trees, as I just did. So let's have a look at the subgroups of this gas station. We have here a referenced file, which is gas station 01. This is the building itself, as we can see. There is another reference file, which is the gas station sign. And then we also have transform groups for attachments, the fences, the lights, props. These are all deco objects. And under details, you can see that we have all these decals for the ground. Yeah, these details are just details, so it's only deco. But if you press Ctrl H to hide them, you see that it looks quite boring without these deco objects. The ground is just like very monotonous. Ctrl H hides the selected objects. We have now hidden the details and all the subgroups. You can see that also in the attributes. Under transform, we have the visibility unchecked. If we check it again, it comes back. So you see that the ground has a lot more detail with these terrain decals. This is generally something which Giants does a lot. So they paint the ground, but then they create a lot of the details with these terrain decals. The terrain decals have some special settings. Let's use this concrete decal 01, the last in the list, as an example. If I open it and select the 3D asset and then click on shape on the attributes, we can see that it is a terrain decal and it's not rendered in viewports. If I change these settings, I can see it over here. But even if I move it up and I put it back to terrain decal, it will still be painted on the ground. So that's a very useful feature, and that's also new in Giants Editor 10, Farming Simulator 25. Because if we now make changes to the terrain decal will follow, and so if there are bumps or whatever, it will always be on the ground. Giants uses that also for their roads. The roads are nearly all terrain decals, so that means if you like flatten the terrain or add a bump or whatever, you don't have to change the 3D asset anymore like it was in the older versions, but instead it will just follow the terrain because it's a decal. Also, what is new in this version of Farming Simulator is that they are using grass patches as deco objects. That was not the case in the older versions. So here you can see that we have like these small grass patches next to the building. In the old Farming Simulator versions, that always looked very clean and therefore not very realistic. And so having these small assets next to the building makes it look a lot more natural and realistic. I always advise you, when you start with modding, use the time and get familiar with how Giants did it, have a look around. Also, for example, if you're wondering how are they doing the transformation between terrain and grass, you see here that they first have this kind of concrete, and they have something with pebbles, and then they start the grass texture. That makes it a lot more natural than a harsh cut between concrete and grass. So this is the kind of thing you learn when you have the look around before you start building stuff on your own. That's it already for today's video. Thank you so much for watching. Now it's your turn. Try it out for yourself. Move around, jump around, and get a feeling for how Giants composes their maps. In the next one, we will start editing the terrain of the map we just opened. So see you there.